He looked at me like I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "You're not allowed to spend that much," he whispered across the table, trying to keep his tone soft, but I felt the cold edge underneath. We were sitting in a cozy little Italian restaurant, the kind with candles on the table and soft jazz in the background. I had just ordered a bottle of wine. Not the most expensive one, not even close. Just something I remembered liking once on a night I felt free. His eyes narrowed as if I had made a reckless decision. I smiled politely, trying to swallow the shame rising in my chest like heat. The waiter froze, not sure whether to walk away or stay. I wished he would vanish. I wished I could. But instead, I nodded quickly and muttered, "That's fine, bring something else." It wasn't about the wine. It never is. It was about that quiet, constant reminder that I needed permission. That I was being monitored, evaluated, corrected. And in that moment, something small inside me cracked. Something that had bent too many times without ever breaking. I looked down at my hands, resting on the white linen tablecloth, and wondered how many dinners like this I had sat through. How many times I had laughed it off, minimized it, told myself, he's just trying to help. But this time, the words stayed with me. "You're not allowed." Like I was his child. Or his property, **** when the bill arrived, he did what he always did, reached for it like it was his right. Like this was just another part of his role, protector, provider, decision maker. But this time, I moved faster. My fingers touched the leather folder before his did, and I saw his eyebrows rise. He let out a quiet laugh, like he thought I was playing. "You don't need to prove a point," he said, his voice lower now. "Come on, just let me take care of it." But I didn't let go. I opened the folder and slid out the check calmly. My hands were steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out a card I hadn't touched in a long time, the one my grandmother gave me before she passed. It wasn't something I ever used. It wasn't meant for nights out or showing off. It was a reminder. A whisper from her saying, "Take care of yourself when no one else does." I placed the card on the tray and handed it to the waiter without saying another word. His face changed, just slightly. That quiet control he always had began to fade, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. That silence said more than any argument ever could. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just acted. And in that act, I reclaimed something I had been slowly losing: my voice, my space, my right to make a choice without asking for permission. ****. The car ride home was filled with that kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels like a question waiting to explode. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other tapping against his thigh like he was holding something in. I didn't say a word. I just stared out the window, watching the light smear across the glass, trying to keep my breathing steady. I wasn't angry, not in the usual way. I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of shrinking to keep the peace. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller just to make him feel bigger. All the jokes I had laughed at, all the moments I had let slide. And for what? So he could feel in control? So I wouldn't be called difficult? I remembered my grandmother's voice again, how she used to tell me that freedom doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as paying your own bill. I didn't pay with her card because I needed to win. I paid because I needed to remember that I wasn't helpless, that I had choices. And maybe that scared him more than anything I could have said. Because if I could pay for dinner, maybe I could also walk away. Maybe the girl who once felt lucky to be chosen was starting to realize she could choose herself. And that kind of power doesn't need permission. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. He brought me coffee, kissed my forehead, and asked if I wanted to go for a walk. It was always like that, soft gestures after sharp words. A cycle I had memorized like a song I didn't like, but knew all the lyrics to. I sipped the coffee and smiled, not because I felt okay, but because pretending made things easier for both of us. He talked about the weather, about work, about a trip we had been planning, and I nodded along, watching his mouth move and wondering how long I had been living in two worlds. The one he thought we shared, and the one I had quietly built inside. Me, made of small thoughts I never voiced, needs I buried, truths I never dared to say out loud. When he left the room, I opened my drawer and pulled out the trust card. I turned it over in my hands like it was more than plastic, like it was proof of something I had nearly forgotten. Not money. Not power. But independence. My grandmother used to say that the worst kind of poverty was forgetting your own worth. And maybe last night, for the first time in a long time, I had remembered. I didn't feel proud. I felt awake. Like something inside me had shifted, just slightly, but permanently. Like I had stepped out of a fog. And once you see clearly, it's hard to pretend you're blind again. **** Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Trips we took. Dinners we laughed through. Smiles that looked real at the time. And maybe they were. But now, I saw the spaces between them, the moments I cropped out, the tension I softened, the parts of myself I slowly edited away to keep the image clean. There was one picture from our anniversary last year. I was wearing a blue dress he had picked out. He loved how it looked on me, and I told him I loved it too. But I didn't. It felt tight and uncomfortable, and I spent most of that night adjusting the straps in the bathroom. Still, I smiled for the camera, kissed his cheek, and posted it with a caption that read, "Grateful for us." I remember getting so many comments. Couple goals, you two are perfect. I didn't respond to any of them. Because deep down, I knew the truth, I wasn't living in a relationship. I was living in a performance. Every "I'm fine" was another scene. Every forced laugh was another line. And now, sitting here alone, I started to wonder how many of those moments were real for him. Did he know I was acting? Or did he think that love looked like obedience? Maybe he didn't notice the quiet sadness in my eyes. Or maybe he did, and just preferred it that way. ***. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside him, his back turned. To me, his breathing slow and steady like someone who had nothing on his mind. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint with my eyes, my thoughts louder than ever. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just done pretending that the silence between us was peace. I thought about the version of me I had become. The girl who used to speak her mind now calculated every word. The woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen now checked the volume of the music first. I had adapted so well that I forgot I was adapting. And in that moment, I realized something that scared me more than losing him. I had started losing myself. My grandmother once told me that love should feel like home, not like a place you're constantly cleaning so no one sees the mess. Lying. There in the dark, I knew something had to change. Not in him. In me. I had to stop waiting for his approval like it was oxygen. I had to stop shrinking every time he raised an eyebrow. I had to remember the sound of my own voice. So I got up, walked to the kitchen, and made tea. Not because I needed it, but because it was my choice. And that small act, in the stillness of the night, felt like the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. The next few days, I started doing small things differently. Things he probably didn't even notice, but I did. I wore the clothes I liked, not just the ones he complimented. I put my phone on silent during dinner and listened to the silence, not trying to fill it with cheerful words or polite laughter. I started writing again, just small notes in a journal I had hidden in the back of my closet. Thoughts I had ignored. Feelings I had buried. I didn't write about him. I wrote about me. Who I used to be. Who I still was, somewhere beneath all the compromise. And it felt strange, like meeting a stranger I somehow already knew. One afternoon, I stayed late at a bookstore downtown. I walked through the aisles slowly, reading titles, touching the spines of books I hadn't made time for in years. I bought one on a whim. A novel about a woman who left everything behind and started over. I didn't know why I chose it, but when I read the first page, I felt tears well up in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because the character wasn't afraid. She wasn't waiting for permission. She just left. And for the first time in forever, I wondered, what if I did too? Not in anger. Not as revenge. But as a way of returning to myself. Because staying just to prove I could endure wasn't strength. It was fear wearing the mask of love, **** that evening, he asked what was wrong. Not out of concern, but like someone. Noticing their reflection wasn't where they left it. "You've been quiet lately," he said, watching me from across the couch. I shrugged gently. "I've just been thinking." That answer didn't satisfy him. He leaned forward, waiting. For more. But I had nothing rehearsed. No explanation wrapped in softness. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want a fight. I just didn't want to perform anymore. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had grown used to my silence. Not because he forced it, but because I handed it to him over and over every time I chose peace over honesty. That realization hurt. Not because of him, but because of me. How easily I had disappeared inside the idea of being agreeable. How quickly I had rewritten my needs to match his comfort. I thought about telling him everything, about the wine, the card, the bookstore, the way I had cried over a fictional woman's courage. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stood up, kissed him on the forehead, and said I was going for a walk. I didn't ask if it was okay. I just went. I walked without headphones, without a plan, just me and the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement. And in that quiet, I realized something powerful. I didn't need him to understand everything. I just needed me to stop pretending I didn't ***. During that walk, I ended up at a small park I hadn't visited in years. There was an old wooden bench near a fountain, half hidden behind overgrown bushes, and I sat there without checking the time. The night was cool, and the sky was that deep, endless blue that only happens when the city slows down. I let myself breathe. Really breathe. No pretending. No adjusting. Just air and quiet and the weight of all the choices I hadn't made. I remembered the version of me before him, the one who used to dream big, speak loud, take up space without apology. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. And I missed her. I wondered how many women were sitting in silent rooms right now, folding themselves into smaller and smaller versions just to keep someone else comfortable. I wished I could reach them, tell them what I was only starting to understand, that love without freedom isn't love, it's a performance. That comfort built on silence will always feel like a cage, no matter how soft the walls. I didn't make a big decision that night. I didn't pack my bags or plan an escape. But I did something braver. I listened to myself. Really listened. And when I finally stood up to go home, I wasn't the same woman who had left. Something had shifted, small, quiet, but irreversible. And that, I think, is how real change begins. Not with noise, but with a whisper we finally choose to hear. The next morning, I didn't wake up to his voice. I woke up to mine. I made coffee without waiting for him to ask how I wanted it. I opened the windows wide even though he always said it made the apartment too noisy. I let the air in. The sounds. The light. I didn't feel bold or reckless, I felt alive. And for once, I didn't shrink from that. He walked into the kitchen rubbing his eyes, and when he saw me humming to myself while making breakfast, he paused like he was watching a scene he didn't recognize. "You're up early," he said. I smiled without explaining. I didn't feel the need to justify joy. That's when I realized something simple but powerful. I had spent so much time waiting to feel safe that I forgot how to feel mine. My space. My body. My thoughts. All slowly reclaimed, one morning at a time. That day, I said no to something small he suggested, a change in our weekend plans, and for the first time, I didn't apologize for it. He looked surprised, maybe even slightly confused. But I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it be. Because I was no longer living for the version of me that fit neatly into his expectations. I was choosing the one who could take up space in her own life. And strangely, I didn't need him to celebrate it. I just needed not to hide it anymore. **** Later that week, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time in months. I brought her the same white lilies she used to keep on her kitchen windowsill, the ones she said reminded her of peace. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full, like the silence is listening. I knelt by her name. And just talked. I told her about the dinner, the card, the shift that had been growing inside me like a storm that never made a sound. I told her I had remembered what she taught me, not in words, but in the way she lived. She never raised her voice, never demanded attention, but no one ever questioned her strength. She once told me that some women carry their courage in silence, but that doesn't mean it's invisible. It's in the choices you make when no one's watching, she said. I hadn't fully understood it back then. I did now. As I traced the engraved letters of her name with my fingers, I realized I wasn't just visiting her, I was reconnecting with a part of me that had been sleeping. A wiser, quieter strength. The kind that doesn't fight to be seen but refuses to disappear. I stood up, dusted off my knees, and whispered, "Thank you." Because this wasn't just about a card or a dinner. It was about a woman slowly waking up to her own voice, and choosing not to silence it ever again. ***. That evening, when I returned home, I found him sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching. The volume was low, the light from the screen flickering across his face like shadows passing. I sat across from him, and for a long moment, we didn't speak. Then he turned to me and said, "You've changed." His voice wasn't angry, just unsure. I nodded, not defensive. Not proud. Just honest. "I think I'm remembering who I was before I tried to be what you needed." He looked at me like he didn't know what to do with that. And maybe he didn't. Because for so long, I had bent and molded myself into shapes that made him comfortable. Shapes that were easy to hold, easy to control. But I wasn't that anymore. I was softer in some ways, firmer in others. Less reactive. More awake. He asked if everything was okay between us, and I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know. What I did know was that I no longer needed his approval to feel whole. I didn't need his validation to trust my decisions. That shift wasn't a threat. It was a truth. One I had hidden for too long under politeness and silence. I stood up, not out of anger or finality, but because I wanted to be in a room that didn't require explanation. "I'm going to bed," I said gently. And for the first time in a long time, I meant my bed, not just his too. A few weeks later, I sat in the same restaurant where everything had started, the place with the dim lights and soft music, the same table near the window. But this time, I was alone. I ordered the same wine. The one he said was too much. I poured it gently, letting the sound fill the space without apology. The waiter smiled, and I smiled back, not because I was trying to appear fine, but because I actually was. I wasn't there to prove anything. Not to him. Not even to myself. I was there because I had reclaimed something that had quietly slipped away over time, my permission. To feel. To choose. To exist fully, without having to fit into someone else's version of enough. I took a sip and looked out the window at the passing cars, the couples walking by, the flicker of life continuing without notice. And it struck me how much of my life I had spent seeking peace through acceptance from others, when the real peace had always been waiting inside the choices I was afraid to make. That card from my grandmother, once tucked away as a backup plan, had become a symbol. Not of money. Not of rebellion. But of voice. Of self. Of remembering that freedom doesn't always look like running, it can look like sitting quietly, alone at a table, drinking wine you chose yourself. And knowing deep down, you're finally home, ****. In the days that followed, people began to notice the difference in me. Some thought I had gotten a new job. Others assumed I was seeing someone new. But it wasn't about any of that. I hadn't added anything to my life, I had simply removed what made me feel small. I didn't broadcast the change. I didn't need to. Real shifts don't scream, they echo. My choices got quieter, but more certain. I started saying no without guilt. I asked for things without apologizing. I laughed, really laughed, without checking who was watching. And sometimes, in the middle of doing nothing at all, I'd feel this unexpected warmth in my chest, like I was finally standing inside my own skin. I even found a photo of myself from years ago, before the relationship. My eyes looked fuller, brighter. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad about how far I had strayed. I felt proud that I had found my way back. Slowly. Honestly. Without rage or revenge. Just truth. I thought about calling him once or twice, not to reopen anything, but to thank him, not for the hurt, but for the mirror he unknowingly held up. The one that showed me what I had forgotten, that silence is not peace, and permission is not love. I never made that call. Some things don't need to be said aloud. Some things are lived. And I was finally living them, on my terms, ****. One afternoon, I returned the trust card to the small wooden box where I had once kept letters from my grandmother. I didn't need to carry it anymore. Not because I no longer valued what it meant, but because the strength it reminded me of was now living inside me, not in my wallet. I sat for a moment, holding it between my fingers, remembering the feel of her hands, the sound of her voice, the way she looked at me like I was already complete, even when I didn't believe it myself. I placed the card gently beside her letters, folded the box shut, and felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It was quiet. Solid. like roots finally finding soil deep enough to hold. That night, I lit a candle and wrote in my journal, not about pain, not about him, not even about freedom. I wrote about self-respect, about grace, about the way healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it just shows up in how you carry your own name. And before I went to bed, I stood in front of the mirror, not to check how I looked, but to see if I still recognized who I had become. And I did. Finally. Fully. Not as someone else's partner, or someone's idea of too much or not enough, but as a woman who paid the bill, and with it, bought back her voice. One choice at a time.